Lekshay Somo, Project Director. And I am asking David and Lekshay to stand and be recognized. David, Lekshay. Thank you. They're from the University of Hawaii, and we have worked closely in planning and developing today's scheduled program. I hope that you will all find this session interesting, educational, and meaningful. A few essential information for your comfort needs. The restrooms are behind this hall, and it's accessible through the Makai and Maka doors, and there are signs with arrows leading to the restrooms. There will be no refreshment breaks, but we have coffee, tea, and pastries. It'll be out on the table throughout the session, so when you feel like wanting something to eat, please go and help yourself. And we also have a table of Buddhist texts in the back, so please browse through them and for your interest. And it can be bought for a nominal fee. And we also have a bookstore in the back here on the Malka side, if you are interested of Jodo Shinshu texts, and also many books of Japanese folk tales for children. If the restrooms are too crowded, we also have one in the annex hall downstairs for your use. And there's 2 exit locations, one in the back there and one to your side. And also, this is like a retreat, and please save your phone cups and plates and forks to use all day. I just can't provide it every time you want to eat. So if you can use the same ones for yourself for the entire session. And now, may I present Dr. David Chaco. He is the Principal Humanities Scholar and Professor of Religion at the University of Hawaii.
Good morning. I must say, having Seth Yoshida as the organizer of this event has made Lekshay and my job very, very easy. We just have to kind of come, and she's been wonderful, and her committee has been wonderful, and the Honganji here has been just marvelous in arranging things for us. I also want to thank some other people. I think you should know that these events, it's a series of 6 Saturdays, plus a number of evening and outer island events, are underwritten principally by the Hawaii Committee for the Humanities. Now, the Hawaii Committee for the Humanities, they get their source of revenue from the National Endowment for the Humanities. George Tanabe, actually, you know, he used to be the state, what did you call yourself? Emperor of what? Of the Hawaii Committee for Humanities, something like that. Volunteer position. No, he just did it out of the goodness of his heart, but this, we hope this funding in Washington continues for National Endowment for the Humanities, because this is the kind of event where the university and the community and different organizations collaborate that was really only made possible by their support. In addition, you've probably seen the community blanketed with publicity, and that's the responsibility of the UH summer session. Is Victor Kobayashi here somewhere? He's everywhere. Victor, please. Incredible job. And you see the layout on this humanities guide, Living and Dying in Buddhist Culture. Victor's artistic sense brought together people to really do a beautiful job for that. In addition, of course, the Buddhist Studies program at the University of Hawaii has been a source and the home for a lot of the work, and Lekshay has really been the organizer, carried on her shoulders. The weight became so great yesterday that her car broke down. So here she was barreling to the airport to pick up some of our speakers, and so you can see the burden that she's been carrying. As part of the summer session, we have for a number, I think almost 35 or 40 people, we have this program available for course credit. Of course, you have to do homework as part of that. And so for those of you who are in the class, it's called Asian Studies 491B. Again, we will meet at lunchtime for 30 minutes. We're going to meet in the headquarters conference room. So it's actually out this door to your left, and you wind out, you go out that door, and then you turn left, and you circle around behind, and there's a conference room. And so after you get your lunch, if you could please bring your lunch with you, and we will meet in that room and go over our homework, I guess, while we eat lunch. That's kind of not a very appetizing thought for some of you, perhaps. But anyway, that's what we'll do. So it's important that you all have lunch tickets so that you can have a bento box with you for your lunch. And if any of you are in the class and do not yet have your lunch tickets, where are the lunch tickets at the back? Could somebody put up their hand? There's where the lunch tickets can be had at the back. Now it's my great honor and delight to introduce the moderator for this morning. The Hawaii Committee for Humanities endeavors to bring humanities scholars together with the community to see how common issues can be illuminated. And our illuminator this morning, we have two illuminators, humanities scholars, and I'll introduce first Roger Ames. He's the director for the Center for Chinese Studies at the university campus. He also is editor of the journal Philosophy East and West. I think the philosophy department is the leading department in the world for comparative philosophy, based upon this long tradition of East-West philosophy. And Roger is really a leading figure in keeping that stature of the department alive. Roger also, I should mention, in this Buddhist temple, a scene of peace. I think his latest book dealt with what? Warfare. So if any of you are interested in the ancient Chinese strategies of warfare, you can find it. Roger's written many books. He and David Haller have also collaborated on a series that's the leading series on Taoist studies nationally. And it gives me great pleasure, as I think not only Buddhist culture, he and I are also, I should warn you, are Canadians. So you may talk about living and dying in Canadian culture, right? But Roger, the mic is yours.
Thank you, David. I want to congratulate the organizers of today's event for their inclusivity. They've included Canadians, they've included a self-confessed Confucian, and this kind of tolerance is entirely consistent with the Buddhist tradition, of course. I have a housekeeping responsibility, and that is that I'm supposed to remind you that it would be a very good thing if you could buy your lunch tickets for next week during the break. So far, so good. I've been asked to be moderator today, which suggests that there might be some immoderation, and perhaps that's the connection with warfare. It's my great pleasure today to introduce my friend and colleague, Professor George Tanabe, who is the chairman of the religion department at the University of Hawaii. George has studied extensively in Japan at Todai and took his PhD from Columbia University. He's authored a considerable amount of research on Buddhism, working on the Lotus Sutra, and his most recent book with Harvard University Press is Myoek, the Dream Keeper. He's going to speak to us today on Japanese pre-death rituals. George?
Thank you, Roger. Yes, I'd also like to add my congratulations to the organizers of the entire project. It has many different facets to it, obviously very elaborate, but as we can see from the turnout today, I think it obviously has a great appeal and fills a certain need in the community, and I hope that I will be able to do my part in order to help to say something of use and give some illumination to this very interesting and important topic of living and dying. I don't know how much bigger a topic we can pick. You know, it covers everything, living and dying. I chose for my task to talk about pre-death rituals. There'll be many other people who will be talking about funerals and talking about ideas of the afterlife. And so if we draw a line and we put an intersection at the middle of the line and say that's the point of death, much of what we'll be talking about in this entire project, will be at that point and beyond the other side, which is the side having to do with the many beliefs and ideas about what happens to us after we die. I thought I would start off by talking about some of the rituals and some of the ideas and some of the rationales that have to do with the part before the point of death. And so I have titled my talk Pre-Death Rituals. I'd like to also give my standard reminder that there is no such thing as Buddhism, that there is no such thing as Japanese culture, that there are only many, many different types of Buddhisms, and that there are many different patterns of Japanese culture. And therefore, what I describe is not to be understood as being somehow representative of all of Buddhism or all of Japanese culture. And in fact, some of what I describe will be very exceptional. You know, it won't be the rule at all. It will be the exception to the rule. And yet I think there is some value at looking at some of these very small expressions of the larger Buddhist tradition, because I think we might be able to address some issues by looking at some of these smaller expressions of ideas and actions of how it is that we go about facing our deaths. Let me take the broadest view, however, and look at ritual in terms of just proper action, proper deportment, something that we as Americans and maybe even Canadians also are not too big on. You know, we're not too big on rituals. I remember Momi Kazimaro, one of the Board of Regents and members of the University of Hawaii, saying that, you know, one of the problems with the universities, we don't have any rituals, you know, and it's true, we have very few rituals, and as Americans, we basically are anti-ritual, we're very uncomfortable with ritual, we might rather just get right down to business. If anything, we prefer going around proper deportment and proper procedure. That's more our style. But if we take ritual to mean, in the broadest sense of the term, proper deportment, you know, correct action, following the rules, and rituals are always defined by rules, then we can take a look at the most generalized area of what might be called pre-death rituals, and that's just the whole area of right action, proper deportment, good etiquette. And all of this ties in, of course, with the idea of karma, namely that as you do good, you build up a certain merit. As you do bad, that fund of merit gets depleted. And all of this has to do with what's going to happen to you in your next life. Again, another idea that is very important to Buddhism, the idea that after you die, there is another life, and that following, succeeding life is affected by the quality of the life that you live before you die. And so I mentioned this very obvious part of Buddhist living because I think it fits in with pre-death ritual if we understand ritual in the broadest sense of right action and good conduct. I'd like to look, though, really, and spend most of my time at several examples of the more specific, narrow sense of the word rituals. Certain kinds of activity that is conducted for very specific purposes. And the first kind of pre-death ritual I'd like to look at is what we might call ritual suicide. Now, suicide is a difficult matter, and it is one that is very controversial. Obviously, it is not something that is easy to embrace. Obviously, it is not something that can be said to be a good thing. For the most part, I think that we think that suicide is wrong, suicide is bad. Most of the time, suicide is carried out in a state of great depression or great anxiety. Not a very good frame of mind we find ourselves in when we contemplate the possibility of suicide. But I'd like to look at some rare examples of Buddhist ritual suicide in which that kind of mentality is not operating. In other words, there is no depression here. There is no deep anxiety here. There is no great sorrow or sadness here. That there is a very clear justification and a very clear acceptance of suicide as not being bad or wrong, but as being something that is good. So good that we can willingly commit suicide, deliberately commit suicide, and feel very good about it because it is something good to do. There are very few cases, and again, let me warn you, I'm not talking about a major pattern here. There are very few cases of ritual suicide, but we do have cases of ritual suicide in Japan, mostly in the medieval period. In the 12th century, a monk rowed out into the middle of Lake Biwa, close to Kyoto, and recited the Nembutsu, faced west because that is the direction of the Pure Land of Amida, and then drowned himself in the middle of the lake. He told his supporters that if his body were to show up on the western shore, that means he would have made it to the Pure Land. If his body floated and showed up on the eastern shore, it meant he would have fallen into hell. And as the story goes, of course, he wound up, his body was found on the western shore, and so his supporters were happy that he was able to reach the Pure Land. Now, there's a scriptural basis for ritual suicide, and it is in the Lotus Sutra. It is in the story about how it is that a bodhisattva drank perfumed oil and ate incense for 1,200 years, and then set himself on fire. And the Buddha, seeing this self-immolation take place before his eyes, said, "Excellent, excellent, good man." The fire burned for another 1,200 years, and here then we have a story of mythic proportion, but a story nevertheless of a ritual suicide which had the full blessing of the Buddha himself, as it is presented in this sutra. And so with this scriptural basis, there has been a justification. There has been a way in which Buddhists who have decided to end their lives have been able to refer back to a sutra itself, to a sacred scripture itself, and be confident that there was not anything wrong with this act, and that it was perfectly allowable and even desirable. After all, if you have lived a good life, if you have a good fund of merit, and if the next life promises to be in a place called the Pure Land, the paradise, unlike the world as it is, which is not a paradise, then that is something to look forward to, that is something to enter, a place to go to sooner rather than later, deliberately rather than accidentally. So I raise this again, and there are other kinds of examples of ritual suicide. There's the example of the monk Sinan, who threw himself into the water, but the water was not deep enough, and so he didn't drown. He failed, and so he dug himself a hole and had himself buried in the hole, and died that way, committed suicide in that fashion. Now again, I raise this point because I think we are talking about, even though we're talking about a very rare occurrence in Buddhist Japan, we are talking obviously about an issue that is of great concern to us at this time, namely the whole issue of euthanasia, the whole issue of assisted suicide. And we have cases, as you all know, of people who have wanted to die, in order mostly to end the misery of their illness. But it has become a great moral and legal problem, and a spiritual problem as well. And I cite these cases of ritual suicide only to remind us that in the complex tradition that we are looking at, there are pockets of justifications, pockets of thinking in which suicide is seen not as something bad, but something good. The second ritual that I would like to call your attention to is the rituals having to do with this idea of daigo. Dai means to come, and go is to welcome. And it refers to the belief that at the point of death, Amida, Buddha, will come, Dai, will come to you and welcome you, and take you back, accompany you back into the Pure Land. And this is a promise that Amida made, the 19th vow of the 48 vows that Amida has made. And it is something that Buddhists have often turned to as a source of comfort and as a source of assurance as they face the moment of their death. And so the ritual involves reciting the Nembutsu, it involves thinking about the Buddha, it involves having the right thought. And we might look at this as being part of the psychology of the last moment. What was the state of your mind at that last moment of death? And we feel, I think, all of us feel very, very much so that that moment is an important moment. And this is why, if we know of people who have died a violent death or who have committed suicide, this is one of the problems with suicide, that they must have been depressed, they must have been distraught. How awful it must be to have as your last moment a moment of distress and a moment of depression or a moment of violent death. And it's very disturbing. There's somehow something that is incomplete yet. There is no closure to that death yet. There is no finality that has, even though the death is most certainly final, but in a psychological, emotional sense, there is no way in which the case has been closed properly. And if only there could have been for that person a last moment in which there was assurance, in which there was comfort, in which there was peace of mind. And so the rituals having to do with Daigo are focused upon bringing about this kind of mentality of the last moment, a mindset in which there is assurance, there is comfort, there is peace of mind. And so with that belief that Amida will come down, and scrolls were painted of Amida coming down over the mountains with a retinue of other bodhisattvas and attendants, and these pictures were placed by the bedside of the person who was about to die, and the person who is about to die will be able to look out and feel assured, feel a comfort that Amida would indeed come and accompany that person back to the Pure Land. There are even cases in which a string was tied from the scroll to so that the person could hold on to the other end, thereby symbolizing a very direct connection. My colleague Helen Baroni will talk about ties that bind, and here is a very literal example of a kind of a tie that binds oneself in this case, binds oneself to Amida and to be able to be drawn, therefore, pulled into the Pure Land. So this is another pre-death ritual in which the important point is assurance and peace of mind instead of fear and despair, the normal kinds of feelings that we associate with death. Thirdly, I'd like to call your attention to a rather new development, actually, in Japanese Buddhist practice. New development is specifically speaking, but actually the idea itself relates to a lot of what we are talking about in terms of assurance and peace of mind. I call your attention to the development of what are known as pokkuri rituals. And we have one of the experts on pokkuri rituals here, Fuki Ikeuchi, who's a student in our department. She has published an article on this, and I acknowledge her because I have learned much from her article, and what I have to tell you is mostly stolen from her work. These pokkuri, what does pokkuri mean? Pokkuri means, quick, a snap, like when you break a branch or something, pokkuri, it's the sound of the word itself, carries a lot of the meaning. And it has to do with the great hope, or I think really a universal hope. You don't have to be a Japanese Buddhist to hope for this, but it's the great hope that when we die, we will pokkuri die. Die quickly. Not die lying in a hospital bed for years and years, not have a prolonged illness, as is the case with so many people whom we know, and many of you, I'm sure, are even providing care for some of these people who are really, there is no hope for recovery or cure, and it's very expensive, it's very painful, and very difficult to die in this fashion. And this fashion of dying, that is slow, prolonged, in a hospital bed, has been a creation of modern medicine, and with modern medical technology, it's able to prolong our lives in this fashion, and therefore the pokkuri rituals have become a matter of more recent, it's a much more modern kind of a ritual in response to the modern developments of medical technology, which allow us to live for much longer, even though we're not really going to get any better. And so there are temples now, pokkuri temples, to which mostly elderly Japanese go, and they pray for a quick and painless death. They pray that they will not be caught in some kind of protracted illness that will last over a long, long time. And this too is related to that old idea of being able to go in a good frame of mind rather than in a frame of mind which is going to be conditioned by prolonged illness. Now, the difference between pokkuri rituals and ritual suicide, of course, is that there is no artificially induced death involved with pokkuri. This is not ritual suicide. This is not, engaging in some kind of action to take your own life, although that most certainly is one way to go quickly. And we now have technology to do it painlessly, although the doctor who provides it is in trouble legally. But it is possible to go pokkuri, through ritual suicide. But the rituals I'm talking about do not involve suicide in any fashion. This is a prayer for a natural death, a quick and a natural quick death and painless death. And these rituals are becoming popular in Japan, again, as it becomes more and more possible for us to prolong our lives, even though we are ill and cannot be cured. And so here, the ideal is for a quick and painless and dignified death, and all of this kind of hope has taken expression in a ritual, in a pre-death ritual, in which you can go and buy an amulet or to have prayers said for this kind of a natural and painless death. There is the last pre-death ritual that I'd like to talk about is called gyakushu. Gyaku means reverse and shu means practice, and so literally it means reverse practice. And here I have to confess that I stole all this material from my wife's book. And she has, you actually have the wrong speaker, you should have had her, because she has done work on Daigo and Gyakushu and so on. But at any rate, Gyakushu is a really interesting kind of a ritual, very ancient ritual. The first case is in the 9th century in Japan, and there's actually a kind of a small revival of Gyakushu going on in Japan now. Now what is Gyakushu? What is this reverse ritual? Gyakushu are funerals that you perform for yourself before you die. Now think of that. That's an interesting idea. It's an interesting kind of a ritual to have. You know, before you die, to have your funeral. My father is a funeral connoisseur. I was going to say junkie, but he's a funeral connoisseur. You know, I mean, he reads the obituaries regularly, and you know, he goes to everybody's funeral. And when he comes back, you know, I'll ask him. I'll say, "Well, how was the funeral?" He said, "Oh, not so good." Or he would say, "Oh, it was a really good one." You know, he's a real connoisseur of funerals. And we've often said in the family that it's going to be too bad that when Papa dies, he's not going to be in his own funeral. You know, so it's going to be a big one because it goes to everybody else's. And you know, he's kind of well known in the community, and you know, it's going to be too bad that Papa is going to miss his own funeral. Think of it. What a ritual to miss in your life. The one time in your life when people will get up and say, "He was a great man." And you won't be there to hear it. You know, you're dead. And so Gyakushu, what a brilliant idea. Maybe I ought to have one for my father. Gyakushu, and I'm interested to see, to hear from any of you. Reverend Muneto and I spoke yesterday, and we were kind of wondering whether there were examples of Gyakushu in Hawaii. And we couldn't think of any example. But some of you might remember, Scott Matsumoto is here, he certainly remembers, about the recent, about a year ago maybe, a year or two ago, Gyakushu pre-death funeral that was held by a very famous Takarazuka review performer. She organized her own funeral. Most of these are fairly elaborate, even from the 9th century on. There's a tradition of being a very elaborate kind of rituals. But you know, here again, it's an interesting kind of activity to put on. My wife translates Gyakushu as preemptive funeral. And what she means by preemptive is that there are certain conditions which might prevent the proper putting on of a funeral. And in order to preempt those threats or those obstacles, possible obstacles to a proper funeral, you make sure that you have a proper funeral by doing it yourself. Some of the old examples go back to, the first example is by a man, we even have his name, Abe Sadayuki. And he held a service, really was for someone in the family, but he also included himself in that funeral because he was afraid that when he died, his descendants would not be able to afford a funeral. You know, funerals can be expensive. They were in those days, they still are or can be. And he was afraid that maybe his family would not be able to afford a proper funeral, and so he had one for himself to make sure, to guarantee that a proper funeral was carried out. In the 10th century, the monk Chonen was about to embark on a trip to China, as monks often or sometimes did go to China. And in the 10th century, this is a very difficult trip. Many did not come back, going on this tiny little boat across the ocean and traveling on foot and so on. It's a dangerous prospect to go on a trip from Japan to China in the 10th century. And he was realistic about it all and thought that maybe he would not return from his trip to China. And if he did not return, if somehow he died on his trip to China, then who would, he was the only son, only child, who would put on a funeral for his mother? And so before he went to China, he conducted her funeral. Now you might think of that as a little bit morbid, Mom, we're having your funeral tomorrow. Could you come? Could you lie in the coffin? People come by and say, what a great woman she was. It may sound kind of morbid, but again, the sentiment behind it is, it's so important. We must have proper closure. And there are possibilities, many possibilities, for a proper closure or proper funeral not to be carried out. And so in order to avoid that, you can guarantee that in some fashion the funeral would be carried out, and so you do it before your own death. In the Tale of Genji, the famous classic Japanese novel, there are many cases of gyakushu. And Lady Murasaki, one of the principal characters in the novel, has, in fact, a whole chapter of the Tale of Genji is dedicated to the description of a pre-death funeral that Murasaki had for herself. Very elaborate. She secretly planned it for several years. She had 1,000 copies of the Lotus Sutra copied to be dedicated at her funeral. And all kinds of different priests were contacted, and they were going to chant, and they were going to give sermons. And there was even a kind of a dramatic performance that she had planned, a dramatic reenactment of a story in the Lotus Sutra. And so the day finally came, and she is ill now. She is facing her own death. And I might point out that all of these rituals that I'm talking about, even though they can be performed for other people, your mother, your father, and so forth, most of these, we're talking about rituals that have to do with your own death. And so now, as Murasaki is facing her own death, she has this gyakushu put on, and it's greatly elaborate. It is immensely successful. People are just awed. They're overwhelmed by the beauty of it all, by the pageantry of it all, by the expense of it all. It's extremely elaborate kind of ritual. And Murasaki is quite pleased. It's been a success. And the novel, The Tale of Genji, describes the important point at which Murasaki makes her evaluation of this event. One would have thought that the possibilities of beauty were exhausted. But the occasion brought yet higher access of beauty. Looking out upon all this joy and beauty, Murasaki thought, how little time I have left. And here we have the coming together, as one of my other students, Jane Friedman, has pointed out, the sense of awari, or the sense of this sensitivity to beauty, tied into the Buddhist idea of mujo, or impermanence. And so at the time, and quite literally, Murasaki is facing the impermanence of her life, how little time she has left. It's all passing. It's going to be gone very, very soon. What's most important for her is to feel this beauty, the joy and the beauty. We had thought that we had reached the apex of beauty by the season and by the occasion, and yet now there is an even higher access to beauty. And so it's extremely important sentiment, and this is what I'd like to point out as an important part of the gyakushu ritual, that there is here joy and beauty in the facing of our deaths, and this can be seen in this pre-death ritual. Let me just summarize my points here, and let me also go back a bit and point out about the Daigo, since we are in a Honganji temple, and Reverend Muneto yesterday kindly corrected something that I had said to him in a summary of my talk. And that is that, as many of you know, Shinran did not think that Daigo beliefs or rituals were necessary. He did not think that you need to have this special kind of ritual at the moment of your death, looking at the picture of Amida coming down to greet you and so on. Because in his view, the moment of faith, the moment at which you affirm the power of Amida and you affirm that Amida's power has saved you, and that moment of faith is the moment of assurance. And that you don't have to wait, in other words, until the end of your life to be assured that you're going to be taken into the Pure Land. There is a kind of an anxiety there, holding on to the string tied to the scroll. Is that what, you worry? Maybe you won't go? Hanging on to the string. And in Shinran's view, you don't have to worry if you have that sufficient faith in which you are assured already, in a way throughout your life up to the moment of death, that you will go to the Pure Land by the grace of Amida's power. And so there is this kind of way in which Shinran did not see the necessity for Daigo rituals. But the point is still the same. Whether you accept or don't accept Daigo rituals, the point is still the same, assurance. And if the assurance can come through a deathbed ritual and the hanging of a scroll, then do that. Because the important point is that there be some peace of mind, some composure, some assurance that the moment of death is not going to bring about some impending disaster. Or if that assurance can be acquired through an affirmation of faith, then that too is fine. The common point for all of the Daigo beliefs, including the rejection of the Daigo belief, is this matter of assurance or peace of mind. And so we have then pre-death rituals as alternatives to the more normal kind of fear and despair and sadness, even perhaps that we normally associate with death. We can have a willing, deliberate, welcoming taking of life through ritual suicide. We can have assurance, peace of mind through Daigo rituals or through an affirmation of faith. We can hope for a quick and painless death through pokkuri rituals, or we can feel, difficult as it is, we can feel joy and beauty in the celebrating of one's own funeral. Now, I pointed out that many of these rituals have to do with one's own death, and if I portrayed these rituals as being somehow positive, accentuating the side of joy and beauty and assurance and comfort and willingness to die, it is because it is easier, I think, to have this positive mentality about one's own death, and much more difficult, of course, when we are looking at the death of someone else, especially someone close to us. Much more difficult to feel positive about the death of your child or your parent or someone like that. And yet still, though, I think what these pre-death rituals tell us is that even if we don't replace the sadness of death, and maybe even if we don't replace the fear of death, that there can be at the same time, or that there can be in the sadness, or maybe even in that fear, that there can be something of assurance and comfort and joy and beauty, which, and this is what rituals are for, which can be generated, which can be made through these rituals. And that, I think, is the importance and the value of rituals, is that they have specific purposes, and that if the ritual succeeds, then there can be, even if we don't replace the fear and the foreboding of death, there can be, as Murasaki said, joy and beauty even in these settings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tanabe. Lots of ideas to work with here. I'm sure that there are people out there who are already planning their Gyakushu. Oh, very nice. Thank you. A very important ritual of our own. Our respondent before the open discussion this morning is Reverend Tatsuo Muneto of Homelanji Betsui. Reverend Muneto.
Good morning. My name is Tatsuo Muneto. I'm the Assistant Chief Minister of this temple. Sometimes I'm a officiant of funeral, weddings. I'm an office manager sometimes, custodian, security chief, and so forth. I'm very happy to see so many of you for this very, very important symposium on living and dying in Japanese Buddhist culture. I really enjoyed Dr. Tanabe's presentation. I like to respond to him for his major sections of his presentation. As you may know, in medieval Japan, some Buddhists and followers of the Buddha committed suicide to make their birth in Buddha land of peace, taking place early. And this idea is sometimes discussed today because we talk about euthanasia and the suicide. As a Buddhist minister, when I am asked if it's this kind of man's behavior is accepted, my response is no. What is important is not to attain birth in Buddha's land of peace, but to continue to live, fulfilling one's purpose in life, personal purpose of life. And we have various kinds of responsibilities in this mundane world. Therefore, I do not accept this idea of making moment of death early. I think death must be natural. That's my stance as a Jōroshin Buddhist minister. However, we have a few funerals here for those who have committed suicide. When I go to funeral, I have so much sympathy and love to the family, and when I know the background of those who committed suicide, although I do not agree with what they did, I respect the person's circumstance, his or her legacy, and somehow funeral service become beautiful and impressive. So that's my response to Dr. Tanabe. I think this will be one of the issues from now on in death and dying in Buddhist culture. The concept of Buddha's coming to welcome a devotee of Nembutsu follower. Dr. Tanabe said Shinran, the founder of Jōroshin Buddhism, rejected, but it was not Shinran, but that was Honen, the founder of Jodo sect, who was the founder of Pure Land Buddhism in 11th century Japan. The reason why he rejected the concept of concept of Buddha coming to welcome a devotee was because he emphasized the mindfulness, right mindfulness. So he didn't think that rituals in terms of lying down in the room with Amida statue or image and having a beautiful flower arrangement and incense, coming up. Rituals are not held for the sake of psychological peace and comfort and security. Okay? Honen maintained that the Amida Buddha's coming to welcome a devotee is a necessity. Those who daily live life in recitation of Nembutsu, Nammandabutsu in deep appreciation to the primal vow of Amida Buddha. By living daily in saying Nembutsu, coming of Buddha to one's deathbed is a necessity. That's what happens. So it's not we have rituals for the sake of peace and peace of mind and comfort and so forth, I believe. If you read a book on this death ritual, deathbed ritual, it's very beautiful and very much impressed. And if you read, you may say, oh, that's what we need in Hawaii today. But you will have to pay plenty money. You will have Buddhist priests coming with beautiful robe. Yeah. I think some of you are thinking about, hey, that's what we need. Yeah, that's what we need. But I think we still have to respect local Buddhist practice, okay? Local Buddhist practice. And what is very important, I believe, is continue to learn the Dharma at home, at church, with friends. Then we maintain this, what you call, the awareness of being one with Amida Buddha's love and compassion. Then I think, we can face death with courage, hope, and to die and to go to Pure Land is not the ultimate goal of Buddhist life. We still come back to share the Dharma with others, according to Shinran's notion of birth. Pokuri-dera, there is a temple called Pokuri-dera in Nara, I believe. According to a few articles, if you go there, you're really impressed by the peace surrounding the temple compound. People look so happy. They look so, helpful. They support you. So those who go to the temple are not ill, yet. They are still working as a retiree. They have children, they have grandchildren to take care of, but they go to Pokuri-dera just to assure when they go, they would be able to go quickly. Pokuri, pong, Pokuri. In Jodo mission, that may be respected, but in Jodo Shin Buddhism, we do not take that very practical. Yeah. There are a few kinds of going. Local ministers so much concerned about how the family members were able to go. They say, Sensei, I'm glad because my grandma was able to go so peacefully. As a human being, I think that's natural, but in Shinran's teaching, it doesn't matter how one goes. In one text called Anjin Ketsujo Sho, there are a few kinds of birth. We maybe kick our legs like this, it's okay, Shinran says. In our Jodo Shin practice, it's okay. And anxiety, that's okay. Going like this is still accepted because so far as there is deep faith in that individual. No matter how one goes, depends upon that person's karma that he or she accumulated for the past many years. Okay, now, Buddhism in Hawaii has been here for 100 years, and as far as Buddhist history goes, I think we have so much emphasized death rituals, and gradually the practices are being faded for a few reasons. I think that's due to the Americanization of Hawaii as a whole. Issei people respected death rituals, and they invited ministers a few days before they died, and the families informed the temple early enough so that ministers were able to go to talk to the patients. But this trend is going away gradually. So Buddhist ministers are encouraging the families to inform the temple ministers so that ministers are able to provide spiritual counseling. I think counseling is very important. Then rituals such as makuragyo and the funerals start to really make sense. However, the notion of having Buddha coming to welcome a devotee wouldn't be necessary. Okay. Again, emphasis must be hearing the Dharma, studying the Dharma here now, share our understanding with families and friends. Then I think we can cope with death and dying more peacefully and practically. In concluding, I have a few old-time members of this temple who wouldn't need Amita Buddha coming to welcome her. They don't have any notion of asking Amita to come and take them to Buddha land of peace. Both of them are Issei, first generation Japanese, and they came to the temple for so many years, so they have very genuine understanding of Amita's compassion and working of the Dharma. So when I saw one lady in November, she knew that she wouldn't make it too long, and she wouldn't be able to come to the temple too often anymore. So she just wanted to say hello. And because I knew that I wouldn't be able to see her oftentimes, in appreciation of the Nembutsu teaching primarily, to come to understand the compassionate heart of Amita, which is always present in us, I chanted Jusege in her bedroom, and that was end of November. And in December, she had pneumonia, and grandchildren came back from mainland. And this lady was suffering because of poor eyesight and hard hearing. However, she still is on. She is at the convalescent center of Honolulu. And when death comes, when she passes away, in the event of her death, the family will inform me of her death, and the minister will go for bedside service. Now, this bedside service is not held with the notion of asking Amita to come to take her. It will be held as a sort of affirmation of faith of the family, including myself, and chanting will be done, and there will be some kind of reading, and there will be a Dharma talk, and the funeral service will be held in a few days after that. So that's what I want to see in the Buddhism in Hawaii. But we are facing more unnatural death, unnatural type of death, so we have to cope with more skills, and that's why we are trying to have a project on a program so that we can able to support the temple community, Buddhist community, from different angles. Anyway, let me finish my response over here. Thank you so much.
We have about 15 minutes for discussion, and I'm sure that there are lots of questions that we can direct to our two experts.
One being in hell rather than in paradise. Again, according to some Buddhist beliefs, certainly not all Buddhist beliefs.
Reverend Moneta, did you have anything that you wanted to add? This lady?
My question doesn't deal with pre-death ritual, but I was curious to know why it seems to be in Buddhism that there's cremation as a way of disposing of the body as opposed to other ways.
Why in Buddhism is there cremation as a way of disposing of the body?
In Buddhist tradition, there are various forms of what you say, disposal. In India, first of all, it's hot and it is very hot. So I don't think it was practical to leave the dead body for a couple of days. But as you may know, in India, the dead bodies are taken to Ganges river. They believe in reincarnation. They go back to water, and the body is cremated along the river of Ganges. Is it Ganges River? Yeah. I believe that's how cremation began in Asian practice. If you go to Tibet, birds come, and they eat flesh, but that's still taken. I'm sorry, I'm not too familiar with the Tibetan practice, but I heard there is a profound philosophy in that kind of burial. Another form of burial is the bodies are put on the tree. This is called wind cremation. Did I answer your question? No? Not quite. What do you want to ask?
I still don't quite understand the idea of cremation and why it's chosen. The fire, the burning.
Could I just maybe add to what Reverend Moneto said? I think the one thing he did say was that there's a kind of a practical dimension to it, at least in a country like India, where it's very hot and you don't want to leave a body out, and it's expensive and complicated to preserve a body, particularly in a climate like that. So there's a practical reason for burning. It's sanitary and it's efficient. But I think there's another idea behind it, that is that fire is seen as purifying. Fire purifies. There are fire rituals. The use of fire in rituals is very commonplace. And in the case of how do you take care of a body, after all, it is a physical, putrid mass. And what do you do with it? And in addition to just a kind of physical sanitary considerations, there's a kind of a symbolic consideration whereby you can think of this as a purifying. And so when you have the ash there, now you have, the essence or the refined, the purified remains of the body, and all of the other stuff is gone. So it's also thought of as a purifying process.
This lady down on the side.
What would you advise people to donate their organs?
I think you have to turn on the mic.
you advise to people who wish to donate their organs after death?
There's a big debate going on in Japan at the moment, precisely over this question, because from the many Buddhist points of view, the moment of death, physical death, does not involve total death. You know, after all, there still is this soul or spirit that is about to embark on another journey towards yet another life. And yet, organ transplants or organ donation requires immediate removal of the organs so that they don't deteriorate. And that presents a problem for a lot of Buddhists because it's still a violation of the person. That the person is not just the totality of the body, that the person is a combination of body and spirit. And to somehow, to cut up and dissect the body is still to cut up and dissect the person as a whole. So, it's a big debate. On the other side, of course, there is the humanitarian side, and there are Buddhists who justify organ donation on the grounds of compassion, an equally important Buddhist value, that one should be compassionate, that the body, after all, is not that important. There are many, many ways in which Buddhists see the body as not being important, and therefore, organs can be donated. So there's a debate going on. It's a mixed, the different positions on the issue. So I can't answer your question and say, yes, donate your organs, or no, don't. But I think it would be helpful to see the reasons for the different sides of the debate. Those who say no, don't, refer to the spirit that is still there, that is still a part of the person. Those who say yes, do, justify it on the grounds of compassion.
This gentleman?
Yes, my question is directed to Reverend Moneto. You said you are in disagreement with the ritual death. I want to know if that's your personal position, or is that the position of the Home 1G here in Hawaii? Because in today's living world today, we have what you call, a lot of people are having living trust. What you call ritual suicide is a matter of semantics now, with living trust. Living will, in the living wills. And is it the position of the Home 1G that they don't believe? Are they in opposition to living wills?
Your question is regard to the suicide, which will be justified or not?
Yes.
Is that your question? Not the
Yes.
deathbed ritual. Suicide.
Suicide.
Suicide. Yeah. Yeah. What I said is based upon that's my view based upon my understanding of Buddha Dharma, not only Honganji but also other Buddhist denominations' position. I think there are practical things to be considered. When it comes to decision making, one really has to know if such an act of taking one's life is justified. In early Buddhism, to commit suicide is against 5 precepts, because the first of 5 precepts is not to take form of life. And in early Buddhism, it was also thought everybody, every being was able to attain enlightenment. So life is very precious. So when I think about early form of Buddhism, we can say it is not accepted that one takes his or her own life. It's very simple, I believe.
And as moderator, I can step in here because I don't think that there is a contention there. My understanding of a living will is that it's to protect the naturalness of the death. That what you're doing is you're preventing the medical profession from taking extraordinary measures to keep you alive beyond the point at which you would die naturally. So it's not a matter, I don't think a living will would be a matter of suicide. It would be a matter of preserving the naturalness of a person's passing. This gentleman?
I just want some clarification on this. Vocally, when it says the pre-death ritual to pray for a quick and painless death, up to what point does this begin to come into a person's life? As we say painless, if a person is dying of cancer and they're in pain, they have to be injected with morphine, is this ritual of pokuri, can that be already intimated at this point? And I don't quite understand how this would be determined, or at what point would this ritual be prescribed?
Yes. Well, basically the idea is that it's a general hope, and you're asking a kind of a detailed point here, but it's just a general hope for a quick and painless death, and it doesn't get into some of the details of well, is morphine part of the painlessness? Is that acceptable or not? It's just a general hope shared by everyone, fairly common kind of a hope that we all go, and that we go naturally. And I think that was part of the living will point that Professor Ames made, that there be a natural death, that it could not be prolonged by artificial means, and that the quicker and the more painless, the better. And people who engage in the ritual don't take into consideration matters such as, well, is morphine justified or not, or anything like that. It's just a hope for a quick natural death.
This gentleman?
I've heard, I'm sorry, I forget your name, but you mentioned that a soul, after you die, your soul goes somewhere. But I have read text explaining Buddhist principles that state very clearly that there is no soul in a Buddhist philosophy that goes anywhere. So what specifically, after a person dies, what is it that goes somewhere? Or is there anything that goes anywhere?
You're asking a classic Buddhist question. And the Buddha, in response to that question, said in one of the early texts, that is a question that tends not to edification. Don't ask it. It's a dilemma. Who knows what goes? But as I pointed out, again, please don't forget my opening, my reminder. There are many different kinds of Buddhisms. In early Buddhist texts, you're quite right. There are those passages that say quite clearly there is no soul. I mean, that's one of the differences that early Buddhism, we can see the difference between early Buddhism and what we now call Hinduism, or Indian ideas of the Atman, that is the Brahman, that the soul is eternal and goes on forever, the kind of thing we read in the Bhagavad Gita. And the Buddha seems to have been making a distinction between that belief of an eternal soul and a soul which was not eternal, a soul that was caught in the constant process of change, as everything was caught in the constant process of change. So there's nothing eternal, there's nothing permanent, and that's why the question you ask is a really great dilemma, because there's something, but what is it? And there have been different attempts to say, well, it is kind of a life force, it's maybe memory, from a past life. There's one definition of the soul which defines it as that which eats incense. And so when you offer incense at the temple, you're feeding the soul. It's soul food. And so, it's defined as that, a dot. That's another definition, a very minuscule, tiny dot. that feeds on, that lives on incense. By the time Buddhism gets to China, Japan, though, the dilemma is basically resolved. I mean, nobody worries about what the Buddha said. Didn't he say there was no soul? Well, yes, but the affirmation by this time of an eternal soul is very, very strong. And all the ideas that we talked about are based upon the idea that there is a soul, that there is something, call it what you like, maybe soul is the wrong word, whatever the word is, but there is something that is more than the body, and it has a life that exceeds the life of the body, in the past as well as into the future. So, of the traditions that we're now talking about, say in Japan, it's not a point of question anymore. There is a soul, and therefore a lot of these beliefs and rituals that we talk about are based upon that idea.
Professor Aoki?
I'm Mr. Aoki, is soul. I've been working with dying people for some 35 years, and I've had about 776 dying people with me. Among them, this is the comment I want to make on the Buddha coming to you. It's interesting that 80% of my patients have said that they have seen someone who died before them come to greet them before they died. This is a very common experience. It seems to me in the wisdom of Amida, she's so busy, so she sends messengers. And that's how Buddha comes to you.
Thank you for your comment.
These rituals that you've talked about are Japanese rituals. I'm wondering whether they've carried over to other cultures as well, or if not, what is it about the Japanese culture that has really fostered this?
Come next week when we go to China, I think, or whenever the China portion is going to be, I'm not sure. But these are, we might say, cross-cultural rituals. So much of what we find in Buddhism in any country, including here in Hawaii, can be traced back to previous cultures as well. We've talked about some Indian ideas. These ideas of daigo, for instance, coming, even though the practice did not really become popular in China, still the idea itself is to be found in Chinese Buddhism as well. So I think these are kind of cross-cultural ideas, and what I try to emphasize in terms of these pre-death rituals is the, you might say, universal human quality. The aspect in which we all want to die a quick and natural death. We all want to have a mind of assurance and peace as we die. All of these are maybe specific and kind of strange, unique rituals, but they have to them an element that can be shared by people in other cultures as well, which is why it's not hard for us here in Hawaii to be able to understand some of these rituals, because they appeal to something that we experience not as Americans or as Japanese or as Chinese, but as human beings.
Maybe I can say just something about the Chinese tradition. The expression for death in Chinese, siwa, has to do with remembering. To die in the Chinese tradition is to be forgotten. And where Japanese notion of mujo is this idea of the celebration of impermanence, in the Chinese tradition, continuity is extraordinarily important. So there's a great focus in the Chinese tradition on keeping the memory of people alive as a way of keeping them alive. So I was in Macau. I visited a temple where the Chinese people there were burning money. We were all familiar with this, giving food and sustenance to the dead people. the idea of burying furniture and vessels to keep the people a part of everyday life, the things that they would use in eating and cleaning them, you know, grooming themselves and so on. There was, in this temple in Macau, they were burning these $10 million notes. And along with the $10 million notes, they were burning $1,000 notes. And so I asked them, why would you burn $1,000 notes? Why not burn lots and lots of $10,000 notes? And they looked at me rather curiously and they said, these people need to make change. In the Chinese tradition, enormously practical. And the job is to keep the people alive through ritual performance. Professor Kobayashi?
I'm enjoying this, but I want to ask a question of George Tanabe. It has to do with the first examples you gave, the first category of ritual suicides, where you gave examples of Buddhist priests committing suicide, say in Lake Biwa. I can understand your point that these are Buddhist priests committing suicide, but I don't quite see what the ritual was. And I wanted to know if there were rituals performed that went along with the suicide, and what were they like?
Yeah, very brief kind of ritual. That priest chanted the Nembutsu and faced the west. So, very brief kind of ritual. Another example of a nun who burned herself, a self-immolation. And here she had, assistants help her with piling up of the firewood. And she chanted the passage in the Lotus Sutra, which I mentioned, which is the scriptural justification for this. So she chanted that passage as part of her ritual, specific ritual, in preparing to do what she was going to do, which was then to next get on that pile of firewood and burn herself. So very minimal. I mean, it wasn't elaborate, not prescribing ritual manuals or anything. As I said, ritual suicide was fairly rare. It wasn't widespread. So people who did engage in the suicide did, I suppose, in effect, make up their own ritual. But I still consider this to be a ritual as opposed to just plain old suicide, which is suicide for very different reasons. This one has a specific rationale. There's even a text to which you can refer to, and there's a particular religious objective for this act. And in that sense, it's all prescribed. And in that sense, it's a ritual, as opposed to just taking your life because you can't stand it anymore.
I wonder if I could follow up very briefly. The ritual has a function, but you're ascribing an objective to it that may be different from its function. I think this was brought out in the Reverend's statement about Shinran. Namely, you can think of the ritual as affirming faith in existence or in death or whatever that might be, rather than having something lying outside of the ritual. In other words, the ritual performs what it signifies. And so when you start talking about objectives or purposes of the ritual, then we're getting into interpretation, which is done by Buddhists as well as non-Buddhists. And the Buddhists themselves may disagree as to what that interpretation is. And I'm curious, and in that sense you mean that there are many kinds of Buddhism, but it has to do with interpretation. But I sense that you're interpreting as though it has to have an outside objective. And I think that's where the difference lies between your viewpoints and the Reverend's.
Yeah, I'll let Reverend Moneto respond, but let me just say that I don't have any interpretation on this point. I'm reporting to you what the priest Sinan, or at least in the account about the priest Sinan, maybe he himself didn't have an interpretation, but that account speaks of the objective of wanting to be reborn in the Pure Land, and that's his objective, or at least according to the account, not my interpretation of his objective.
After the medieval Japan, there was a reformation of Buddhism. in 11th century Japan. And since after that, in many Buddhist denominations, rituals are taken as a kind of form in which followers of the Buddha can affirm the presence of the Buddha's compassion, except maybe some sects that emphasize discipline and the importance of precepts. But as far as Pure Land Buddhism, including Pure Land Shin Buddhism, the rituals are the opportunities for us to awaken to the presence of Amida Buddha. And the self is transformed. Defiled self is purely transformed into the self which is able to continue to share the Dharma with anybody around them. As Professor Aoki said, I think many people have vision of holy ones, but that's what Honen says. One who is aware of the presence of the Buddha and respond to it in the saying of Nammanda Butsu, at the moment of death, sees Amida coming. So Honen, the founder of Joro Shu, maintained that no rituals for the sake of what you call attain mindfulness. Okay? Buddha comes, therefore mindfulness is provided. And many followers of Honen were able to go in that what you call deep awareness. So that's what you know. As far as Pure Land system goes, that's what we are trying to attain, and that's what we are going to promote in this community.
We've come to the moment when this panel must pass on, and the next one will be reincarnated. Please join me in thanking Professor Tanada.
My eyes or in case of the reference.
The focusing device. There's a focusing device in here somewhere.
Where?
It's just, well, probably here. Mine, it's somewhere right around here. We're just looking with the viewing focuses. So that if you're wearing glasses or if you have bifocals or you have just different eyes, it adjusts for you.
Why is it that I'm not getting into it, Jack?
But then there's auto